Every closed system has a crack. And through that crack, eventually, light gets in. You know what's interesting about information? It doesn't stay still. You can lock a door, you can control a narrative, you can build an entire public image around a carefully managed version of reality. But information has this quality, this almost physical property, where it finds the lowest point and it moves toward it. Slowly at first, then all at once. And right now, inside the world surrounding the Duggar family, information is moving. I'm not going to tell you I have a source sitting across from me in a coffee shop passing me documents. That's not what this is. What this is pattern recognition. What this is understanding how controlled information systems work, how they eventually fail, and what the signals look like when they begin to crack. And when you understand the pattern, you can see it happening in real time. So if you've been following the Duggar story, and I know a lot of you have been following it for years, this video is going to reframe everything you thought you understood about what we know, what we don't know, and why right now, at this specific moment, the gap between those two things is closing. If this is your first time on this channel, my name is Jenny, and this is Jenny Exposes, where we go deeper than the headlines, further than the tabloids, and we ask the questions that mainstream coverage either won't ask or doesn't know how to ask. If that sounds like something you want more of, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because what I'm laying out in this video is a foundation, and the follow-up videos are going to build on it fast. Like this video too, because it genuinely helps more people find this content. And this is a story that deserves a large audience. Now let's talk about what the word insider actually means in the context of the Duggar world, because people use that word loosely, and it's worth being precise. When most people hear Duggar insider, they imagine a family member, someone with the last name Duggar or Duggar adjacent, someone who sat at that dinner table, someone whose childhood was documented by TLC cameras. And yes, those people exist, and some of them have spoken in fragments over the years. But that's actually the smallest category of potential insider in this story. Think about the actual ecosystem that surrounded this family during those 19 kids and counting years. You have TLC production staff, camera operators, producers, sound technicians, segment producers, people who spent hundreds of hours inside that home, who saw what happened between takes, who observed the family when the formal filming was done, and everyone assumed they weren't being watched anymore. That is a significant group of people with significant access. Then you have the church community. The Duggars are embedded in a specific religious world, a world with its own social infrastructure, its own events, its own network of families who knew the Duggars, not as television personalities, but as neighbors, as congregation members, as people whose children played with their children. That community has hundreds of members, maybe more. Then there's the homeschool network. The Duggars were deeply connected to the homeschool movement conferences, curriculum groups, speaking engagements, leadership circles. People who knew them in that context saw a version of the family that the cameras never captured. And then there are the personal connections, family friends, former household staff, medical contacts, the kinds of peripheral relationships that every large family accumulates over decades. Each one of those people is a potential node in an information network. Each one of them saw something. Each one of them carries something they know. The ecosystem is enormous, and every ecosystem has members whose loyalty eventually reaches its limit. So how does information actually escape a high-control family system? Because it's almost never dramatic. It's almost never a whistleblower standing at a podium. What it looks like in practice is much quieter and much harder to track until you know what you're looking for. It starts with a comment. Someone in a community forum, maybe using a pseudonym, says something slightly more specific than they should, a detail that's too precise to be guesswork, and most people scroll past it, but the right person notices it and files it away. Then there's the shift in language. A former associate gives an interview, maybe about something completely unrelated, and where they used to be carefully, specifically non-committal when the Duggar name came up, now they're just quiet, in a different way. The careful non-committal has an energy to it. The new quiet has a different energy, and that shift means something. Then there's the sudden appearance of specific details in public coverage that aren't sourced, that don't come with a name attached, but that are too precise, too textured, too internally consistent to have come from nowhere. Somebody told somebody something. The information is in the ecosystem now. It's circulating. This is what I mean when I say the information is moving. It's not a press conference. It's not a document leak. It is the slow, deniable, fragmented process by which truth escapes containment. And once you understand what that process looks like, you can watch it happening. Now I want to spend some time on Kendra specifically, because I think Kendra Caldwell Duggar is the most important figure in this story right now. More important than Josh, more important than Jim Bob, and she's also the least understood. Here is what I think people consistently underestimate about Kendra's situation. Her isolation was never just about direct control. It wasn't simply a matter of someone telling her what to do and what not to do, and who she could speak to. It was structural. It was architectural. The world she moved in was built in such a way that genuine confidential connection was nearly impossible, not because of any single rule, but because of how the network around her was constructed. Think about who Kendra could theoretically have confided in. Her own family, the Caldwells, were themselves embedded in the same religious community, connected to the Duggar world through relationships that long preceded Kendra's marriage. Her church community was the Duggar church community. The friends she had access to were friends within a world where information traveled back through social channels to the people at the center of that world. Confiding in someone wasn't just a personal act. It was an act that sent a signal through a network, and that signal would eventually reach people who would use it to tighten the architecture further. This is what genuine isolation looks like in high-control environments. It's not a locked door. It's a social world where every door leads back to the same room. And here's the theory I want to put forward. The insider who is now talking to the person through whom information is beginning to move is very possibly someone who was themselves caught in that loyalty web. Someone who is connected enough to see and hear significant things, but whose own position in that web created its own kind of constraint. Geographic distance helps. Time helps. The collapse of the system's ability to protect its members, which we'll get to, help most of all. When the web loses its structural integrity, people who are held in place by it start to move. And when they move, they talk. Now, I want to get specific about what kind of insider information actually matters in a situation like this, because I think there's a widespread assumption that the most damaging information would be dramatic. A single incident, a confrontation, something with a clear before and after. And I want to challenge that assumption directly. The most valuable insider in this story is not someone who witnessed a dramatic moment. The most valuable insider is someone who witnessed the ordinary. Here's why. A dramatic incident is defensible. It can be contextualized, minimized, explained away as an anomaly, a misunderstanding, a bad day. Attorneys are very good at doing that. Public relations people are very good at doing that. A single incident, no matter how serious, exists in isolation and can be treated as an exception to a claimed pattern of normal, healthy behavior. But ordinary witness behavior, the daily texture of a household, the small, repeated dynamics that constitute the real structure of a relationship, is not defensible in the same way. Because it doesn't describe an exception, it describes the rule. The way decisions were made in that household on a regular Tuesday, the way disagreements were handled when nothing significant was at stake, the way Kendra was spoken to in private versus how she was spoken to in public, the way her expressed preferences were engaged with or not engaged with, the way the children were managed and by whom and with what language and what emotional register, the way time and money and space were allocated and who had the authority to allocate them. This is the texture of life. And this texture, described credibly by someone who witnessed it repeatedly over time, does something that a dramatic incident cannot do. It establishes a pattern. And pattern is what changes the legal and public calculus fundamentally. Pattern says, this was not an exception. This was the environment. This was the architecture of her daily experience. And once a pattern is established, everything else, every public statement, every managed interview, every carefully framed Instagram post gets reread through that lens. That is why the ordinary witness is the most powerful witness. And that is what I believe the insider in this situation carries. So let's talk about timing. Because if information is beginning to move now, why now? What changed? This is actually the clearest part of the theory to me, And it's the part that I think most coverage misses entirely, because it requires understanding how high control systems maintain themselves, not just how they break down. A controlled community maintains loyalty through an exchange. The community, whether it's a family, a church, a political organization, or a business, provides protection to its members. Social protection, financial protection, reputational protection, access to community resources and relationships. And in exchange, members provide loyalty, silence, and public support. It's a transaction. People don't always think of it that way consciously, but structurally, that is what it is. Now, what happens to that transaction when the community loses its ability to provide the protection it was offering? Josh Duggar's conviction didn't just end his public life. It significantly degraded the Duggar family's capacity to function as a protective network for the people attached to it. The family's public standing collapsed. The financial infrastructure connected to the brand contracted. The social capital that made loyalty to the Duggar world a rational choice. The sense that being connected to this family meant being connected to something powerful and protected, that capital evaporated. The protective value of loyalty decreased. The moral cost of continued silence about things that, in retrospect, look very different in light of what the public now knows, increased. The calculation changed. The math is different now than it was 5 years ago. And when the math changes in a loyalty system, people start talking. That is where we are. That is what I believe is happening right now, in the spaces just outside of public visibility, in the forum comments and the private messages and the conversations at events where people who used to be careful are being slightly less careful than they used to be. The insider is talking. The information is moving. And in part 2, I'm going to get into what I believe that information specifically contains, what the courtroom implications look like, and why all of you watching this right now may collectively already hold more pieces of this picture than any single journalist covering the story. Part 2 is coming. Make sure you're subscribed and notifications are on, because when this breaks into mainstream coverage, you want the context already loaded. We left off talking about timing, about why information moves when it does, about the specific conditions that cause people inside controlled systems to stop being careful. And I want to build on that now, because understanding the why of the timing is actually the key to understanding the what of the information. The two things are connected in a way that matters. When people start talking after a long period of silence, they don't talk randomly. They talk about the things that have been weighing on them the longest. They talk about the things they've been most careful not saying. And in the Duggar world, the thing that has been most carefully not said for years, across a wide network of people, is the ordinary, the daily, the texture of what life actually looked like inside that household when the production value was stripped away and it was just people living. That's what the insider carries. And that's what I want to walk through now in as much detail as I can, not as confirmed reporting, but as a carefully constructed theory built on observable patterns, public record, and a genuine understanding of how these systems work. Everything I'm about to say is my analysis, my theory, my read of the available information. But I want you to sit with it because I think it's going to resonate with a lot of what you've already been sensing. Let's start with what we actually know publicly about Kendra's situation, because the public record itself, if you read it carefully, already contains signals that most coverage doesn't adequately address. Kendra Caldwell was 19 years old when she married Joseph Duggar. 19. She had been raised in a world in the Caldwell family's specific corner of the conservative homeschool movement that was itself a high-control environment, with its own architecture of managed relationships and limited outside contact. She had not been to college. She had not lived independently. She had not had the kind of varied social experience that gives a person reference points, the ability to look at their own situation and compare it to other situations, and recognize when something is outside the norm. She entered the Duggar world from that starting point, not as someone with an established adult identity who chose to adapt to a new environment, but as someone whose identity was still forming, in a context where the forces shaping that identity were entirely controlled by the world she was entering. Now combine that with what we know about the Duggar family's operational structure, The way the household was run, the way gender roles were enforced, not just as personal preference, but as religious mandate. The way female autonomy was framed theologically as something to be surrendered rather than exercised. This wasn't a quirky lifestyle choice. This was a comprehensive framework that touched every decision, every relationship, every aspect of daily life. And Kendra, at 19, stepped directly into the center of it. The public version of Kendra that we saw on television was carefully managed, as all public versions of Duggar family members were carefully managed. She smiled. She spoke in the cadence that the environment had trained her to use. She expressed gratitude and contentment in the specific register that the community recognized as appropriate. She performed the role. But here's the question that the insider's information addresses. What was happening when the performance wasn't required? This is where I want to do something a little different. I want to walk you through a scenario, a speculative, dramatized reconstruction that is clearly and explicitly a theory, not a transcript, not a reported account. A narrative illustration of what insider testimony in a legal context could potentially look like, based on patterns that are well documented in similar cases. I'm flagging this clearly because I want you to engage with it as the analytical tool it's intended to be, not as a factual claim. With that said, imagine a witness, someone who was in the Duggar household regularly over a period of several years, not a family member, someone from the extended ecosystem, church community, family friends, the kind of person who is present enough to be unremarkable, invisible enough to see things without being seen. This person is now sitting in a deposition room, or a courtroom, or across from an attorney in a conference room with a court reporter transcribing everything. And the questions being asked are not about dramatic incidents. They're about the ordinary, because that's where the real information lives. The attorney asks, when you were present in the Duggar household, how would you describe the dynamic between Joseph and Kendra? And the witness thinks for a moment, not because they don't know the answer, but because they've been carrying the answer for a long time. And the act of saying it out loud, in an official context, with it being written down, is different from simply knowing it. And they say, she asked his permission before she answered questions, even questions directed to her specifically, even questions about her own children. She would look at him first, every time. And the attorney says, was that unusual in your experience? And the witness says, I've been in a lot of homes. I've been around a lot of families. I've never seen that. Not consistently, not as a baseline, not as the normal operating condition of a household. No. Now, I want you to think about what that testimony does, not dramatically, but structurally. It doesn't describe a crime. It describes an environment. It describes the daily architecture of a relationship. And it does something that is very difficult to undo once it's in the record, which is that it gives context to everything else. Every subsequent piece of evidence gets filtered through it. Every claim about the relationship's health gets measured against it. That is why the ordinary witness is the most powerful witness. Because they're not testifying about an exception. They're testifying about the rule. Now let's talk about the children, because I think this is the dimension of the story that is most underreported, and that the insider information is most likely to illuminate. The Duggar family's approach to child rearing is not a private matter. It has been extensively documented in public, through the family's own endorsement of specific child rearing literature and methodology, through statements made in interviews, through the practices observable in the television footage itself. And what that public record shows is a parenting philosophy that prioritizes obedience, compliance, and the suppression of individual will as religious virtues. In that framework, a child who expresses strong preferences, who questions authority, who shows emotional volatility, is not a child who is developing normally. They are a child who is failing spiritually. The correction of that failure is not framed as discipline in the conventional sense. It is framed as a spiritual obligation. Now think about Kendra's children growing up in that environment. And then think about Kendra herself, a young woman who was raised in a version of that same environment, who internalized it, who has no comparative reference point for what a household without that architecture looks like, navigating motherhood inside a framework that she didn't choose as an adult, but absorbed as a child. The insider who witnessed the ordinary in that household, who saw how the children were spoken to, how emotional expression was handled, how the daily texture of parenting unfolded, that person carries information that is about one relationship. It's about a pattern that is replicating itself into the next generation. And in the legal context, in a family court context specifically, that information is not just relevant, it may be among the most significant information available. I want to address something directly because I know it's going to come up in the comments and I'd rather engage with it here. Some of you are going to ask, why are you covering this? What is the point of building theories about insider testimony and family court dynamics around people who are, at the end of the day, just a family that was on television? And the answer is this. The Duggar story has never actually been about a family that was on television. Television was the mechanism through which a specific ideology, a specific set of beliefs about women, about children, about authority, about what constitutes a valid human life, was packaged, distributed, and normalized to an audience of millions of people. The harm that ideology has done is not abstract. It is documented. It is ongoing. And the people most directly affected by it, the women and children who grew up inside it, deserve to have their stories told accurately and completely, not in the sanitized version that the television cameras captured, but in the full, complicated human version that the insider information begins to reveal. Kendra Duggar is not a television character. She is a real person whose real life has been shaped by forces she did not choose and was not equipped to critically evaluate. And the insider who is talking, whoever they are, wherever they are in this process, is not a gossip. They are a witness, and witnesses matter. Now, the strategic question that I think is most important right now, and that I want to leave you with as a framework for following this story going forward. What happens when the insider testimony becomes publicly attached to an official proceeding? Because right now we're in the phase where information is moving, but not yet anchored. It's circulating in the ecosystem, in the community forum comments, in the private channels, in the spaces where people who are inside the world are speaking with slightly less caution than before. That information is real, and it is moving, but it doesn't yet have the weight that an official record gives it. The moment that changes, the moment that specific insider accounts become attached to legal proceedings, to depositions, to court filings that are publicly accessible, is the moment the entire public narrative around Kendra and Joseph Duggar shifts permanently and irrevocably. Because at that point, it's not theory, it's not community speculation, it's the official record. And the official record has a weight that tabloid coverage and YouTube analysis simply cannot replicate. I believe we are close to that moment. Not because I have a document that says so, I'm being completely transparent with you. I don't have that document. But because the pattern of information movement in this situation, the timing of the legal proceedings, the degraded protective capacity of the Duggar network, and the specific signals I've been tracking in public discourse all point toward a convergence. Things that have been moving separately are moving toward each other. When they meet, I believe they will meet, and I believe it will be sooner than most people following this story expect. The resulting shift in the public understanding of this case will be significant. Not incremental, significant. And this is where I want to bring you in, directly, personally. This community, the people watching this video, the people who have been following this story across years of coverage, collectively holds more contextual knowledge than any single journalist assigned to this beat. I mean that genuinely. The people in this comment section include former viewers who have been watching this family since the early specials in the mid-2000s. People who grew up in adjacent religious communities, people who have professional expertise in family law, in psychology, in the specific theology the Duggar family practices, in child development, in the behavioral patterns associated with high-control environments. That is an extraordinary collective resource, and I want to use it. So I'm asking you directly, what do you think the insider knows that hasn't been publicly reported? I want to be clear about that, not speculation about criminal behavior, but the ordinary, the daily texture. What aspect of life inside that world do you think would genuinely surprise people if they heard it described honestly by someone who is there? What is the thing that the managed public narrative consistently glosses over? What's the detail that never quite adds up when you watch the footage back? What's the dynamic that you've always felt was present, but that no one in mainstream coverage has been willing to name directly? Drop it below. Think carefully and write it out. Because I read these comments not just to generate content, though I won't pretend that community engagement doesn't inform what I cover. I read them because the collective intelligence in this comment section is genuinely one of the most valuable analytical resources I have access to. This is a collaborative investigation, and the next phase of it depends on all of us paying attention at the same time. Let me tell you what's coming on this channel, because I want you to understand why being subscribed and having notifications on right now is not just a routine task. It is genuinely time-sensitive in a way that most content on this platform is not. The legal proceedings surrounding Joseph and Kendra Duggar are at a stage where new filings, new motions, new public documents can appear with very little warning. When they do, the context for understanding what those documents mean is the framework for reading them accurately, rather than in the sensationalized, surface-level way that mainstream outlets will cover them. That context exists here, in this channel, in the body of analysis that I've been building. If you're not subscribed when that happens, you're going to find a clip of the headline and no understanding of what the headline actually means. If you are subscribed and notifications are on, you're going to get the analysis within hours of the public record changing. That is a real difference. Beyond the legal developments, I am actively working on a deep dive into the specific religious framework that shaped both the Duggar family and the Caldwell family, tracing its origins, its theology, its documented effects on the women and children raised within it. That video is going to recontextualize everything you think you already understand about why Kendra's situation looks the way it looks. It is going to be one of the most thoroughly researched pieces of content on this topic anywhere on the platform. I am also working on a comprehensive timeline, a documented, sourced, carefully constructed chronology of the observable signals in this story, from the earliest public coverage through the current moment. Something you can share with someone who is new to this story and have them understand in a single video what the pattern actually is. That is coming. These are not vague promises. They are in production right now. So here is what I need from you before you leave this video. If you are not subscribed, subscribe right now. It takes 2 seconds and it is the only way to make sure you don't miss what's coming. Hit the like button on this video. I know that sounds like a routine task, but the like count on a video is one of the primary signals that YouTube uses to decide how widely to distribute it. Every like is a vote that says this analysis deserves a larger audience. If you believe this story matters, and I think you do, or you wouldn't still be here, then the like button is one of the most concrete things you can do to make sure more people find it. Share this video. Specifically, share it with one person, not a mass share to your entire following. One person who you know has been following this story, who you think would engage seriously with this level of analysis, who deserves to have access to this framework before the mainstream coverage catches up. That one targeted share is worth more algorithmically and practically than a dozen casual reposts. And leave your comment. Answer the question. What does the insider know? What is the ordinary detail that the narrative has been carefully managing away from? Tell me below. The insider is talking. The information is moving. And this channel Jenny exposes is where the context lives. When this story breaks into mainstream visibility, and it will, you will want to already understand what you're looking at. You will want to already have the framework. You will want to already know the pattern. That framework is here. That pattern has been documented here. And the next installment, which is going to go further, deeper, and more specifically than anything I've put out on this topic so far, is coming very soon. I'll see you in the comments. And I'll see you in the next video. Stay curious, stay careful, and keep watching.